Hi, everybody. Good morning from Rye, New York. Good morning, Salvador in Guatemala. How are you?
Good morning, Denny. It's great to see you, and thank you for having me. This is really an honor to, especially after seeing that long list of very, very interesting chats you've had so far. It's an honor to be one of those included in this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. While we're getting started, while people are getting on the call, I will just give everybody here a little bit of information about you. First of all, you're the first speaker that we have from Latin America, which it's about time. So I'm very honored to have you here with us, one of the most prominent families from Latin America. And you've done so much in so many areas. You've dealt with crises. You managed to cope with them very well. And I think, especially in times of COVID, we always like to talk about especially family stories that we think are exceptional, and I think definitely you're a great example. So let me share a little bit more about you and your history. So basically, Salvador Paiz del Carmen is the chairman of PDC, a regional multi-Latina whose purpose is to transform lives. Through his business and nonprofit efforts, he worked towards the development of his country, Guatemala. The Paiz family has a tradition of 85 years in the supermarket business in Central America. In 2012, alongside his brother Sergio Paiz del Carmen, he led the consolidation of the family business, Grupo PDC. PDC is a private company with investments in various industries, including distribution of fast-moving consumer goods, distribution of individual goods, manufacturing, and financial services. In 2014, he negotiated the acquisition of Magia Bianca from Procter and Gamble. Today, he serves as chairman of the board and CEO of the PDC Capital Division. In addition, he is the chairman of FANSEPA, Sergio Paiz Andrade Foundation, for its initial in Spanish. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And they leverage the technology to improve the quality of education at a national scale. We will soon talk about that. So first of all, good morning. And how are you doing?
Good morning, Denny, and good morning to everybody that's joined our call this morning.
Yeah, so yeah, we have great families with us today. I will fix my, I didn't put it correctly. Oh, all right, completely fell. Okay, I will fix that in a second. While I'll be doing that, maybe you will start with telling us a little bit about yourself. And from there, we'll go to the story of your company and all of that, but maybe a little bit of background of you and your family while I work on my background.
Sure. Well, again, it's nice to meet everybody virtually. My name is Salvador Paiz. As Danny mentioned, born and raised in Guatemala. I got my studies in the US. I went to Wharton undergrad, MIT grad, and then I worked in banking in New York for a little bit before joining the family business.
Great. And first of all, how maybe just before we'll jump to your family business, how do you see COVID, by the way? How is it in Latin America in general? How is it in Guatemala? How does it affect your life? I mean, we'll dive into more details as we continue the conversation, but in general, how things are there? Do kids go to school? Is it under control? What's going on?
I would say, as with many things in Latin America, it's a very disparate scene. It depends on the country. Guatemala specifically, and many of the countries in Central America have been fortunate in that we locked down early. We've mandated mask use. We've got a couple of measures in place that have kept COVID quite under control. So fortunately, COVID so far hasn't been too bad, which is also fortunate from the point of view that we don't have a very strong healthcare system to deal with COVID if it got very bad. So, I think it has made sense to be extra strict in our countries. And fortunately, some of those measures are now being relaxed, and the economies have been opening up the last 2 or 3 months, and we haven't seen an uptick in numbers just yet. So hopefully that will remain the case, and hopefully, everybody that is listening in on this call is also safe and doing well in these very, very troubling times.
And we will talk about your efforts. I mean, you're doing a lot to help your country deal in general, and specifically now dealing with this with COVID. But maybe just before, just a quick question: how do you feel Latin America well, Latin America is of course very diverse. Maybe I should ask in general, how do you think Latin America in general and Guatemala in particular dealt with COVID? I mean, in the States, in other places, there's a lot of course, we're talking about two things: the economic support. So obviously the States, Canada, other places in the world have basically put on billions and trillions of dollars to support, or billions of dollars to support businesses and employees. So how that worked out, and from the other angle, how do you think they dealt with the disease in controlling it? In the UK, when I speak to our guests, they always tell me how they are embarrassed really with how the UK government, for instance, didn't deal with it as they should have, and things are out of control. By the way, a country that usually is even more, I would say, tougher than others. When you bring an animal to the UK, it needs to be quarantined for a month, what you don't need to do in other places. How do you feel the Latin America in general, even though it's hard to generalize again, and Guatemala dealt with it economically and regarding, keeping this under control?
And again, it's hard to generalize, but in the cases of countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and say countries like Honduras, relatively small governments, and I would say relatively dysfunctional governments. So we're not used to governments working and taking the leadership when these crises hit. And countries like these, the private sector has really stepped up to the plate time and time again, every time a crisis hits, which I'm not advocating that that's necessarily the right solution, but it just happens to be what's had to happen in order for countries to keep going and really tending to these crises, and not just, we've had COVID obviously for the last, since March 13th was the date in Guatemala, but I would also say we've been hit by 2 tropical storms recently. So that has also compounded the effects, and it's 2 other crises on top of the, COVID crisis, which is already affecting our economies and our countries and our health systems and everything else.
Got it. Okay, maybe we should talk a little bit about the company, the family business. Maybe you can share with us how it started, when it started, and later on we can talk about I know a major crisis that you guys were facing, and you were called to save the day, and you have. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about the family history.
Sure. Thank you, Denny. So let me tell you a little bit about the family history, and I will start with this, right? It started with a watermelon. My grandfather was an orphan at age 7. His only brother dies at age 11. He was left literally alone in the world and had to fend for himself, and used his wit to do so. And one of the very first things that he did was he bought a whole bunch of watermelons in the little town in the middle of nowhere in Guatemala where he was from. And he had the bright idea. He said, I'm going to bring all these watermelons to Guatemala City and sell them in the central square. When he arrives, he sees everybody else has watermelon, and he's not the only guy with this bright idea. So he winds up creating a tower of watermelon. And that's where he got his first experience in merchandising in the supermarket business, right? So it all started with really that story with the watermelons in the Central Plaza. And in 1928, he opened his first counter store, La Bombita, which was selling leather goods and a couple of other things. And it wasn't until 1952 that he opens his first real supermarket. And it was a self-service supermarket. 1952 is, way before even, Sam Walton got into the supermarket business. So he was a very early adopter of this self-service concept, one of the pioneers. People thought he was crazy that he was opening up the store to let people walk through the merchandise. What a concept, right? But obviously, I think he was onto something, and it led to what was a multi-format retailer. We had the supermarket business, Super Paiz. We had the hypermarkets, which are like, the large format super centers or other formats of other retailers that you've seen. And we also had a hard discount format, kind of like an Aldi in Germany, if anybody's familiar with Aldi in Germany. Very limited assortment, very, very low prices, and geared to the bottom of the pyramid, which is very, very important in these countries, obviously. The Paiz family overall, I would say, a very, very hardworking family. And this is, a picture of my grandpa, Carlos, who started the business, my grandma, who was always by his side, and the creative talent in the family and in the business. And then my father and mother, I joke around, my father was the general manager of one of the stores. My mother was the head of cashiers. So it left me under the counter where they used to approve the credit cards with those, manual imprinting devices, right? So the bassinet was left under that counter, and that's, we literally lived the supermarket business as a family, very, very hardworking family. Also, to give you a little bit of background and a little bit of sense, this is 1986. I went to my grandfather and I said, Grandpa, I want to start a business. I thought I was brilliant because I had a captive audience and a captive customer to buy meat. So I said, Grandpa, I want to start a cattle business. And he looks at me and he says, okay, so how are you going to start a cattle business? This is, 11 years old at the time. I said, well, you're going to lend me the money. So he says, if I'm going to lend you the money, it's going to be with interest. We're going to establish we're going to incorporate into a company. We're going to draft all the legal paperwork, et cetera, right? So we became 50-50 partners in what was then called Carlos Paiz y Nieto. I think my grandfather must have had a blast, kind of showing me the motions of how to be an entrepreneur. It was not a very successful venture. Unfortunately, cattle prices, as with a lot of commodities, fluctuate. And when time came to sell the cattle, because they were nice and fat, price of meat wasn't necessarily where I would have wanted it to be. So I didn't make a whole lot of money. I paid my grandpa back, his principal and interest. And then I said, and Grandpa, by the way, here are the shares to the company. Which he then changed the name to be Carlos Paiz y Nietos, which is grandchildren plural. And we then went on to do a couple of other businesses, all of my cousins directly with my grandpa, which was a fun way to learn about entrepreneurship and to work together and closely with my grandpa, who is a real engine and a real machine. Then, as what you were talking about, right, we had this perfect storm of sorts. 2002 comes around and a couple of things happened. One was we were at the time associated with Royal Ahold, the multinational supermarket operator, who announced that they were having arithmetic issues in their financial statements and that they were going to be selling off their investments in many of their Latin American ventures. So, you know, we were one of those ventures that was going to be divested, basically. And second thing that happened is my father passed away in a tragic airplane accident, looking for the development of the country and traveling with other members of the business community to try to learn about how to develop the country better. So unfortunately, those two things happened almost simultaneously. My father was also going to be the person that was going to be assuming the chairmanship role in our business. We thought of ourselves as very organized on the family business front and very organized on the succession side, and my father was going to be assuming the leadership role. We always assumed the elder sibling, my Uncle Carlos, who was the first of 5 children, would be the first to go, and we never, you know, figured my father, who was, you know, 10 years younger and the 4th out of the 5 children, would be the one departing. So it really threw a wrench into our planning, the fact that obviously my father was no longer there. So unfortunately, that's where I was brought in, and I had to, you know, step up to the plate and try to figure out what we were going to do. I assumed the leadership role. Sorry?
How old were you then when this whole thing is happening? And
27.
27, right.
So at 27, yeah, I had to assume the presidency of the family holding company. At the time, we weren't very organized and didn't have as much separation in terms of the various. So we, you know, one of the things I started doing was creating a, you know, separation between the foundation board, the family office board, and the patrimony board, which was also, by the way, different from the corporate board, because the corporate board had these international partners, Royal Ahold and the Uribe family from Costa Rica. So first order of business was really trying to organize the governance structure and to organize the various entities where things had to be decided. The other thing was I brought in literally the guy from Harvard that wrote the book on negotiations, knowing that we were going to have to negotiate the exit of Ahold and negotiate the entrance of a new investor. I literally brought in the guy that taught the negotiations course from Harvard and wrote the book on Negotiations 101 from Harvard. And he gave us a course as a family to say, you know, this is the lingo, this is what to expect in a negotiation. We ran, you know, simulations in abstract, but that was very helpful going forward and allowed the family really to tackle the negotiations and the sale from Ahold to what was initially Walmart stores US in 2005, and the eventual merger with Walmart Mexico, where we merged all of Walmart Central America with Walmart Mexico in 2010. So that's a little bit about, you know, the whole, I guess, Walmart side and the supermarket piece. And we're now out of the supermarket business. But then in 2012, my brother and I basically looked at each other and it said, you know, are we going to be liquid investors or do we want to operate businesses? And honestly, we're much more business operators than financial investors. So we decided in 2012 that we were going to dive headfirst, all in, and that's when PDC was basically consolidated. PDC meaning Paiz del Carmen, Not a lot of thought, I guess, went into the naming process, but that's where PDC was born. And our purpose, we defined it as transforming lives within the company and transforming lives of those we touched, whether customers, suppliers, etc. We now have coverage from Mexico to Peru. So we're slowly but surely growing as we're still a small multi-Latina, but with aspirations and big, lofty ambitions. We have a couple of different lines of businesses. Like you mentioned, we, consumer goods, we do an industrial division. We have the PDC Capital division, which is the one I look after on a day-to-day basis. We basically provide real estate-backed loans. And talking about crises and how crises are many times a source of opportunity, PDC Capital was literally born in 08, 09, in the aftermath of the mortgage-backed crisis. Everybody was running away from financing anything that had to do with real estate. We figured if everybody's going one direction, there's got to be huge opportunities in the opposite direction. And literally that's where PDC Capital was born. And we're doing that ever since. As you said, we've done a couple of very interesting acquisitions. It's not every day that a large multinational like Procter and Gamble sells a #1 brand, literally the #1 brand in consumer bleach products in the region. And we were able to acquire it and beat out a whole bunch of other multinationals who were interested in bidding for this particular brand. And actually quite recently, last week, we closed on another acquisition, which is Australian Milk Products, which is another leading brand in milk products in El Salvador. So that's a little bit about the business and a little bit about PDC.
So two questions I have. One, well, maybe I'll start with the first one. Why you? Why did the family chose you to come to the rescue and none of your siblings, not external manager or something like that?
Well, there were a couple of things I think that came into play, not least of which was my background in finance. I had been working in New York in banking. Most of my other cousins, all very bright, all very entrepreneurial and hardworking, but more so in marketing, merchandising, supermarket operations, logistics, etc. I had brilliant cousins on the operations side of the business, but no one really from a finance background and an M&A background, which is what I brought to the table. So it wasn't intuitive also from the point of view that I'm the 14th of 21 first cousins, right? So certainly not by pecking order or by age, I guess. Again, my dad was the 4th of 5 kids, so we're towards the younger end of the cousin spectrum, not the older end.
And I like always to ask questions that others don't. So how many siblings are you and what are your siblings doing?
My siblings, we're 3. I'm the eldest. My brother Sergio and I, we manage PDC. We kind of split the work and we have very complementary skill sets, so it works out pretty well. And my sister Carolina, she's a very shrewd shareholder, but she's not very active at all in the family business. She's working for Netflix in LA, and she's quite an accomplished producer of TV shows that I'm sure you've seen. So yeah, Orange is the New Black was the latest one she did.
Sounds to me like she's the one really having fun here in the Paiz family, like more than anyone else, right? It's it sounds like fun thing to do.
Yes, absolutely.
And just another question before we dive to the next one. How did you win the bid on Procter and Gamble's brand? I mean, you mentioned you were competing with very experienced multinational giants. Why did Procter and Gamble go with you? How did you win that bid? What was the strategy there?
It was a very interesting story. we heard through the grapevine, you know, these are not big countries, right? So we heard that this brand was for sale. I found out who the banker was from a bank in New York. I won't name the bank. Called him up and I said, I heard this brand is for sale. I want in, right? I want to be a part of this process. And he said, who are you? You know, it's like, I don't know you. You're from where? Guatemala? It's like, no. You know, he literally would not entertain us even providing a bid. And I said, you know, so I obviously put the network to effect, you know, figured out who his boss was, called his boss, and actually had somebody I knew and respected in banking in New York, a very, you know, recognized banker, call his boss on my behalf and say, you really should listen to these guys and you really need to make sure that these guys are part of this process. So, you know, that was the way in, which was a part of it. The other part of it, believe it or not, and I think the real key was that Procter and Gamble was very concerned about their employees. What would happen with the people as the business was going to be sold? And I think that, you know, regardless of the other considerations, price and whatnot, the one area where we really were able to differentiate ourselves from any other multinational buyer was to say, we will take really good care of your people. We will take really good care of your employees. We guarantee that not a single person will lose their job as part of the transition. Not a single person will be, you know, economically affected or will have their conditions reduced in any way, shape, or form. So I think that that was also a key factor and feature. And lastly, I think we can move quickly, right? We're privately owned businesses. We make decisions very, very quickly. You know, I went to the last round of negotiations with the head of M&A for all of Procter and Gamble, and he says, well, I'm the head of M&A for Procter and Gamble. I'm authorized to make decisions on my company's behalf. Who are you? And I said, well, I'm just the chairman of the board, but if that's not sufficient, you know, so it was one of those funny moments.
Nice to see that, you know, a group like Procter and Gamble really cared about the employees, and it's not a KKR Nabisco story where you sell to whomever and they just cut, you know, wherever they can. And by the way, that reminds me, one of my sessions was with my good friend Mitzi Perdue. I always like, by the way, to describe her. You know, her late husband, Perdue Chicken, and her father was Sheraton. And I always like to say, if $1 billion side of her family goes bankrupt, she always has the other. But what's interesting, when she told me that when her father started Sheraton, they were basically going in the midst of the Great Depression, and I think it was in Chicago. They were buying a luxury hotel, which people told them, you're out of your mind. What the hell are you doing? With the money they had from the army, they were not very wealthy people. They went to fight, you know, the war, and they had some savings. They put it all in that, and the first thing they've done was to renovate the rooms and the facilities of the employees. And they gathered them around saying, guys, with everything that goes on here, we know that the ones that can run the business best and know it best is you guys, and we are not letting anyone down. We're not firing anybody. And they showed by renovating their part of the hotel rather than actually what you should probably do, which is the guest, I think proved that point. And she said that was a key point for the growth of the Sheraton to what it was, you know, ended up being. So very, very interesting. By the way, guys, I just want you to know that I worked with Salvador about, we had great questions aligned, and I'm asking him all the questions we didn't talk about. So to make it more real and exciting. So just so you know, this is as real as it gets. So maybe now, Salvador, I know you do a lot of stuff in the philanthropic side of things, which is very, very heartwarming, and especially in COVID days. So can you talk a little bit about your philanthropic work? And of course, how did that change during COVID days? We have you on mute. I cannot hear you.
Sorry about that. It's that's probably the you know, the most cited phrase in this day and age, right? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we started FUNCEPA, which is Fundación Sergio Paiz in my dad's memory. That was a something that we did in 2004, roughly, with my siblings and my mother. We wanted to do something in my dad's memory, and he was very techie. He was very into education, and we decided to create a foundation that would equip public schools with computers and would leverage education to try to improve the quality of education in Guatemala. So we started working on FUNCEPA, but also the trip that I was mentioning that my dad was on was for this other foundation called Fundesa, which is the Foundation for the Development of Guatemala. So I also joined the board of Fundesa, and we have been very hard at work with the folks at Fundesa to try to create a country development roadmap for the development of Guatemala. COVID's obviously been challenging. COVID's caused a whole bunch of changes. And I would say both foundations have done very interesting things with regards to COVID. On the side of Fundesa, for example, literally something like 70% of all of the COVID tests that were performed in the first 4 months of the pandemic, which were literally the most critical months of the pandemic, those tests were provided by Fundesa and our donors. And I think that that was a huge effort that we undertook. We also provided these oxygen helmets, which have saved hundreds of lives. Those have been very interesting, and I haven't seen those being used as broadly. I think that a lot of hospitals internationally are using intubation, and quite honestly, intubation, especially with this virus and the pressures on the lungs, you're seeing a lot of ruptured lungs and so forth. The helmets have been real lifesavers to raise oxygen levels. So we've done a bunch of things. We've donated beds, we've donated the tests, PCR tests, antigen tests, antibody tests, really you name it. We've done so many different things to try to be supportive to our country. And also from the FUNCEPA side, we started working with the Ministry of Education to help teachers teach from home and help students learn from home. We created what's called a Teachers 911, which is a chatbot on WhatsApp, which is an automated chatbot that allows teachers to ask questions. I have a certain lesson that I have to provide tomorrow, and I need a lesson plan. And by the way, I need it in one of, we have 17 different languages that are spoken in this little country of Guatemala. So the chatbot also provides it, if it's available, in the language that the teacher is requesting. We're doing a big campaign called the Gift of Connection, sending tablets to kids, tablets and connectivity to kids that don't have it. Obviously, this digital divide and COVID is having much more of an impact on kids that, the lower income kids that don't have access to technology, don't have access to internet. So sending devices out to them. Another interesting thing we did was Coursera. We launched Coursera for Guatemala. We provided over 40,000 scholarships. As far as Coursera has told us, we're the third most penetrated country in terms of the taking advantage of the Coursera scholarships opportunity during COVID. We've adjusted the way we're doing teacher training, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess the last thing I would say is we're working very hard with the Ministry of Education to plan for the safe opening of our schools, hopefully in February of next year.
That's brilliant. And when the COVID really started, I thought many families would now will not have time for philanthropy because they have issues to deal with that nobody expected, that are taking much of their wealth and time and attention. And it's great to see such initiatives. I can tell you, not too many people know, but the people that attend our online sessions, because that's what you get when you do that. For instance, Silverstein, that I believe I introduced you to as well. Nobody knows, but when this started, they were putting a lot of capital into masks for the hospital, for the hospitals, for actually the doctors. It was a big deal back then. They didn't have any. By the way, as you remember, some people even took advantage of lack of masks and try to make profit out of it in the US, which wasn't very nice. And then I had another session here with Mount Sinai, and they also talked about that. So it's great to see that some families actually put a lot of capital and time into supporting what's going on in the world. And how did COVID influence you? I mean, your life, your daily routines, your company. I mean, it's a difficult situation. Did you guys have to do anything tough to deal with it? I mean, how did you cope?
Well, again, a lot of uncertainty. So the first thing was trying to cope with that uncertainty and to try to give our own teams and our people the skills to deal with all of that uncertainty. So one of the things that we wanted to reduce was their fears, right? And one of the fears was losing their job. Another one of the fears was, will I get infected? So very, very early on, we came out with strong messaging to say, and this was a big risk on our behalf, I believe, but I think it was worth it, was to say nobody's going to lose their job during this pandemic. We will safeguard every job. Nobody's going to have a reduction in their compensation during the pandemic. We will, safeguard your compensation. And thirdly, we will invest into everything that is required to keep you safe at work. So because I was working on the testing side on, trying to provide testing for the government, we knew, what tests to buy, who to buy them from. So we were able to acquire also tests that we were administering in the, the company infirmary and the company health facilities with the, obviously, the appropriately trained health staff and so forth. So we also invested in the medicine that would be administered, and anybody that got infected, we were providing 100% of those medications free of cost as well. So, a lot of things changed, and I would say, maybe we went a bit overboard, but it has proven that, people responded accordingly as well. People have, are even more committed than they were to our company, even, more convinced of our purpose of transforming lives, and the fact that it's not just a slogan or a tagline. It's something that we truly, truly, truly believe in. And it makes us, an attractive place to work, and a place where, post-pandemic, everybody wants to come work for a place like PDC.
So we have a question here. What are the outcomes in terms of the number of children educated via your program to secondary level?
So let me answer that a couple of different ways. I guess we have delivered a certain amount of computers to public schools in Guatemala, 20 some odd thousand computers to 1,700 public schools. That has impacted over the course of the last 10 years. Over 2 million children have gone through those public schools that now have technology. So the numbers get to be quite large. Our ambition is to cover every single public school in Guatemala. and provide them with technology and provide them with connectivity. So we're still far from where we want to be, but I think the impact of what we've done to date is quite significant. I would also say that we measure and have third-party evaluations of the differences in learning that are generated by our programs. So it's not just about, you know, here's the technology and off you go. It's about really creating tangible learning outcomes. And the last thing I would say, and this is probably, you know, it's like an iceberg. The bottom of the iceberg that nobody really talks about and nobody really knows about is the work that we do with teachers. Very early on, we realized that teachers, you know, the kids, they got it. They got it the first day the lab was open. They were sitting there, they were doing stuff. But the teachers were very apprehensive that the kids knew more about the technology than they did, or they got it easier than the teachers did. So we started a teacher training program, initially with Microsoft funding. Microsoft gave us a large donation to train 25,000 public school teachers. And I said, I don't think we'll ever get to 25,000 teachers, right? I mean, that's a huge number. We've now covered 86,000 teachers have gone through one or more of our teacher training programs. And that's, I think, the real fundamental change that's happening in education in our country, is the fact that 1 in 2 teachers have gone through one of these training programs, and they want more. So we now have a program that runs on a USB so as to not depend on connectivity. And it provides them a comprehensive teacher training course, which is authorized by the Ministry of Education. So, you know, it's been a fascinating ride to try to really impact education at a big scale, national scale, for the entire country.
That's amazing, you know, and it's not just a cliche about how important it is to help the children. You know, I once went in Chicago in an Uber, and the guy looked old, but, you know, I didn't know how old. And when I asked him how old he was, and he was so complete and relaxed, and he said, I'm like 93. And I was like, okay, how the hell do I get out of this Uber alive? But he didn't hear that. And then we started to talk because he looked so happy and relaxed. Turns out the guy, until 10 years before, he was a music teacher, jazz, in a very poor area in Chicago. And he says, one of the things that makes my life complete is when I see a kid people reach out to me when they're 30 and they say, you taught me when I was 10 years old. And the reason I didn't end up in a gang is because of the love of music that you put into me. And he told me, listen, I was teaching, and every other week, one kid didn't come because he died, because somebody shot him or he shot somebody else. It was that bad. And that's the power of, you know, when you help kids so early. And Matt Sorum, I interviewed the drummer of Guns N' Roses. I'm actually a big fan of good rock. Everybody listen to the new AC/DC album. And again, not too many people know, he started a foundation where they donate music instruments to schools, and he forces other celebrities, Steven Tyler and all these famous people, to adopt a school and donate those. And when you don't have money and you live in hell, you know, and you got that music, that you know, that charming, that sense of enthusiasm that nothing else can convey, like music and arts and all of that, it drags them, some of them, out of their real life into being something big. So that's great. Sorry, I just thought I'd mention that. And you know, it's interesting to ask you your views about preparing the next generation, because you were not prepared. By the way, I met several families also along the years that had these issues. You know, sometimes you build the legacy right, you prepare everything, but sometimes when you're young enough, you don't worry about it yet. And I actually dealt with several families, actually from Israel, a real estate family, very known, that suddenly the father passed away. In their case, it was even worse because they had nothing to do with the business, and suddenly it fell on them. So with your experience, bad experience, but I guess it put you more resilient, and you managed to do great things with it. You didn't have it set, right? I mean, but on the other hand, you were prepared to some extent. How do you see preparing next generation and all of that to avoid the challenges that may arise?
Well, I would say the first thing is we were prepared, and we had, for years been discussing, succession and governance and retirement ages and, preparing our next generation and so forth. So I would say that it is a very worthwhile effort, because even though we weren't expecting this specific scenario, we were prepared, right? And my grandfather, because he himself lacked a formal education, he left a grant for all of us to basically go to business school and get not business school, but a master's degree. So he was very keen on that, right? He was very keen on assuring that we had a high level education. But I would say that going forward, we have to really design some of the systems that we were fortunate to have for the broader Paiz family into the now PDC nucleus. And we're trying to create or recreate some of those good practices. We're having once a year or twice a year these basically shareholder meetings to a certain extent with some of the members of the next generation, the older cousins. We're not that many, our own branch, we're only 3 siblings. So we're only, 4, 6, 8, 8 next generation members. So we're having some of the elder cousins come to these meetings to learn about the business, to see the good, the bad, what's working, what's not, and where we're headed, so that everybody's at least, what I would say is at least a shrewd shareholder, right? I think that's what you can hope for. Not everybody's going to have an interest to participate in the business. Not everybody wants to work in this business. But I think if anything we've learned from my sister Carolina is if you can have a shrewd shareholder, that's a great thing to have as well.
Amazing. And maybe a couple of questions, how you see COVID affects different sectors. I mean, you understand technology and your background is finance. You had a lot of experience there as well. So one, what do you think is going to happen with technology? Which sectors do you think are going to be more interesting? Obviously healthcare probably and others, but I would love to hear your views. And second of all, financial markets. I mean, I always thought, after reading all the reports by the big banks that tells us that everything's fine and everything is, the markets, the prices are reasonable and everything. And I'm like thinking, doesn't make sense because the markets didn't really crash as they should have given what we're facing. So do you think the market actually has it right? What do you think is headed we're facing in the next 1 or 2 years? So basically technology and finance, how do you see the financial markets? How do you see both sectors?
So I see a lot of opportunities in the disruption that's been caused through COVID. I see a lot of things moving faster. We were already going towards, for example, online grocery and, grocery delivery. Things of that nature, I think, are accelerating at a very, very fast pace. The adoption rates are increasing much faster than we originally expected. So I see those disruptions, even things like restaurant delivery. You would have never thought these high-end restaurants would have been delivering food, and now they are. So many of those things, which also impact payment processing and payment options, all of those, I would say, complementary subsystems that need to be there in order for some of those other businesses to be able to now perform in this new era, right? So I think that there's a huge opportunities in these also complementary service plugs or providers. And the last thing I would say, one of the things that we're evaluating quite closely is the concept of also formalizing the informal sector. Our economies in many countries in Latin America are characterized by a large informal part of the population. 70% of all of the active labor force in Guatemala is informal. Therefore, no social security, no benefits, no anything, right? Even no minimum wage if you want to get technical. So how do we bring that informality into the formal side of the economy? That's also one area that we've been looking into quite closely. And in particular, how do we formalize that mom and pop store, which today, you know, is informal, doesn't pay taxes, etc. How do we bring them into the formal side? How do we bring, obviously, technology to help them do that in a way that is efficient and that transforms their business and transforms, obviously, their levels of profitability as well.
Interesting. And maybe finally, my final question to you would be, what I ask all my guests, how do you think the world would look like after COVID? Which sectors you think would be doing better than others? Will we be back to normal now that we're seeing kind of maybe the end in sight? I mean, people talk about the fact that we'll be doing so many Zooms. I personally cannot wait to stop using Zoom. No, I'm kidding. But, you know, there are many things you don't see in a Zoom call that you only see when you meet one another and you see the office where you sit and you learn about the person you deal with. I think the fact that none of my 5 kids comes rushing in here while we do this session is a Christmas miracle. You know, there are many issues that I think, and we all used to travel and all that comes with it. Many would say, oh, the world has changed. We're not going back to the office 5 times a week. We don't need to actually fly and meet people now that we learned how to work with this thing. What do you think is how do you think the world will look like?
Well, I think a couple of things. I do think that we've gotten used to a different way of communicating and doing business. So I do think that we're going to see changes in the way we organize, changes in the way we go to work. Ourselves, we're already experimenting with these, you know, kind of 2 or 3 days at home and 2 or 3 days in the office. We're creating these different ways of doing business and organizing kind of the workplace environment. I would also say that, you know, internationally, especially businesses that operate in more than one country, I would also say that there was always the headquarters effect, right? Whoever was based in the headquarters had a bit of an edge because, you know, the hallway interaction, etc. Now everybody's been brought to the same playing field. We're all on the same Zooms. We're all on the same Teams meetings, whatever. So I think that that's also an interesting change. And it's been, you know, we have to look at some of the positives. And I think that for running businesses that are multi-country and multi-location, you know, I think we're learning to organize ourselves better to do that. So I also see businesses being more able, not less able, to expand internationally and do business internationally and not just be constrained to their domestic markets, so to speak. I also, you know, I think healthcare, if I have to pick one thing, I do see, you know, and how can I put it? I unfortunately had the chance of lifting the hood, looking under it, and seeing that it's not pretty under there, right? The way healthcare is delivered, certainly in our markets, but I think even globally, I think the whole healthcare sector is going to have to rethink the way it does things, rethink, you know, even in the US, things like litigation, things like, you know, approval processes, things like, you know, the bureaucracy of the entire healthcare system, prevention versus remedial healthcare, et cetera. That's a huge, huge, huge area that I think has to change. And if COVID has taught us anything, is how ill prepared we were to deal with something like this, and how we need to do better. Hopefully there won't be a next time, but we certainly have to do better, and we can do better.
And business-wise, do you think now, when things will get back to normal, you see yourself flying less, for instance, because you'll say, why do I need to actually fly? I can do a Zoom call?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there is, but you'll always travel. You know, I think we're going to travel maybe, you know, 70% of what I used to travel. But I do think that people will still travel. People will still go to, you know, conferences, and you know, at the end of the day, it's a much richer networking environment. And say this, for example, on the one hand, we've got the advantage of being able to do these calls and getting people convened from all over the world and having a chance to share. But on the other hand, we're missing the richness of what happens afterwards with the, you know, the hallway conversation, or meeting after the conference to have a quick chat, or, by the way, I have this business opportunity, how do I contact you, or here's my business card. That part is missing, right? And I think we're still going to have physical meetings for some of that to occur.
Exactly. I think that kind of interaction you completely lose if you're at home and you're not in the office. You know, that hallway discussions and ideas that might pop and suddenly, that doesn't really, I think we missed that definitely. So I guess we'll find the balance. So maybe just one last remark here from one of our guests. Danny, thank you for always having a best guest. Thank you, Salvador. Salvador, thank you for a great inspiration. We learn and work for same goals in Cyprus now, building IT community, and we witness interesting trends. Startups and investments get younger. Teenagers are gaining true financial market with creative approach. Do you see that in Latin America, and do you accelerate underage startups? And you were an underage startup at the age of 11, I would say.
Yeah, true. No, listen, I think that you are going to see more and more entrepreneurship. I think that you're starting to see that it's easier to raise capital. You're starting to see that it's easier, you know, even things, all of these platforms nowadays for startups and for your ideas and to get things funded. Certainly, I applaud that, right? I think the more entrepreneurship we have, the better. I also, you know, put a little note of caution always, because they never told you in business school how hard it is to be an entrepreneur, right? So kudos to everybody that is going out there to be an entrepreneur, but also, you know, the note that you have to. I had a business school professor that had one of these very long acronyms, and once you asked him what it meant, he said, every entrepreneur needs a spouse with a steady salary, right? So, you know, at the end of the day, it's not for everybody. It's for those people that, you know, that can commit the long hours, can commit the resources, and can commit to the sacrifices that it takes to be an entrepreneur. But we certainly need more entrepreneurs, and kudos to the young entrepreneurs, because they bring the great bright ideas, right?
Anything we missed here that we need to, anything else you'd like to add, Salvador?
No, I mean, I guess just, you know, I'm available if anybody wants to get in touch with me. My email, salvador@paiz.org, is probably the easiest one to remember. But if I can, you know, be of any assistance, if anybody wants to do business in Latin America, for sure, you know, drop me a line, send me an email. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I look forward to building that network, right? And again, unfortunately, we didn't get much of a chance with this format for that kind of interaction, but feel free to send me an email. Happy to chat.
So I will tell you two things to you and our audience here. One, I would love to interview your sister. So let her know that she has fans here, and we would love to hear her story. Two, not too many of you know. I like to start sentences with "not too many of you know," even if you know. It sounds better. But Salvador, I asked him to join our effort in the UAE. As I've mentioned before, with the new normalization, peace, whatever you want to call it, agreement with Israel, that I think puts the region in a very interesting place. I thought, when we build something there, it's going to be very interesting. So not only bringing Israel's top families and the UAE and the region's top families, but I thought, wait a minute, the Americas are a major part of everything that goes on there, and it's a huge opportunity. So I asked Salvador to join our steering committee of the UAE event and come over to speak. Alongside families like Desmarais, De Gaspé, and Sheraton, and Silverstein, and others. And what we're started to do is, if you see those online sessions in 2 days, this Thursday, we are opening a series of discussions with colorful figures from the UAE, meaning private families, governmental institutions from Bahrain and Abu Dhabi and Dubai, associations, really colorful, different people from different sectors, different generations. My first guest this Thursday, by the way, at 9 EST, not 11 EST as we usually do. Obviously, we're working with the UAE. That's a different story. I need to tell you at one time. I'm chasing time zones since I was born. I was working at El Al Airlines when I was young, wrong time zone. Started to do in Israel. I was a journalist covering Wall Street, wrong time zone. Started to do conferences, did mostly in the US and Canada, wrong time zone. Moved over here, UAE started. So I will never get it right. But anyway, my guest in 2 days is Mishal Kanu. I just want to tell you guys, one of the most iconic business figures in the Middle East. He has a reputation as a futurist and strategist with a strong track record in forecasting economic developments in the region. He serves as the chairman of the Kanu Group, one of the largest, longest running and independent family-owned groups of companies in the Gulf. He helps people reach their professional dreams. His excitement of helping others achieve their goals, big or small, is what drives him. He's a huge art collector. Not too many, again, knows that. And he will be here with me this Thursday at 9 EST. And I will hopefully see you, Salvador, in person in Dubai and Abu Dhabi when we do our event. That's what we're talking about, and take it from there.
And like you said, not too many of you know, but Guatemala and Israel have a very special relationship between the two countries, as Guatemala played a pivotal role at the United Nations for the creation of Israel itself. So, we celebrate that relationship, and it'd be, again, an honor to collaborate and to be a speaker at the, I think at this historic event and this historic moment that is going on with UAE.
And I will tell you one last thing on January 21st. So we were always very tech oriented coming out of Israel. We had to have edges in order to grow in the States. So technology was one thing we hung up to. And in 2018, we did several blockchain conferences that were nothing like the blockchain conferences people know. So no weird advisors and stuff. So that left us with 10% of that market. And now that PayPal got back in the game, and I don't know if any of you checked, but cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, are at higher than they were in 2018, which is crazy. So we're doing an event about that, January 21st. I will do a session with the founder of Ethereum. I think it's worth over $1 billion in net assets, Anthony. And the other speakers are the heads of blockchain at Microsoft, HP, Bloomberg, Ernst & Young, Baker McKenzie, Libra, which is Facebook, which they have a different name now, and many, many other great names. So as we always do, we try to knock people off your feet. So we hope you guys are on your feet. Well, not on your feet, actually. Well, actually, it's time to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Salvador, for being with us. Thank you for all the great families that join us every time to listen and get a glimpse of people's visions. And we'll see you soon. Stay safe. And we'll see you soon in person.
Yeah, I hope so. And everybody stay safe.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.